Hi there, and welcome to the final episode of Season 1 of Nocturnal Transmission, with your host, yours truly, Ryan Kerr. I am so proud of myself. In less than one calendar year, I produced over 115 episodes of Nocturnal Transmission, either through Instagram Live or through this pre recorded podcast and YouTube format. Woo! I can't hear you. Well, I wouldn't be able to hear you anyway because this is a recording. But I wanted to say thank you for supporting me thus far, and I hope to see you in June when I start things up again with all new content. I have some interviews lined up, and I'm very excited about them. However, I'm really happy to leave the series with this interview with radical gem cutter Michelle Mai, who lives just outside of San Jose, California. Michelle is going to talk to us about what got her into the industry and a little bit more about the gem cutter world. Is it white? Probably. Is it male dominated? Absolutely. Is it always the big guys, sort of like a monster truck rally? Mm-hmm. And she's going to talk about how she's grown clientele, how she even created a gem design based on the coronavirus, and how she's melded her personal beliefs and activism into her professional hobby. So, without further ado, come along to San Jose, California for episode 12, Another Facet to COVID. Yee! Hi, Michelle!
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
I'm so glad to finally reach you. So you're actually not the first guest that I've messed up the time for because you're in a different time zone, and but I felt the most shame with you. So that's
I'm sorry you had to feel that shame, and you should absolutely not feel that because I fuck up calendar invites all the time.
So tell me, so where are you right now?
I am sitting in the kitchen table at my boyfriend's studio where I've been chilling out here since the lockdown started.
And that's in California.
This is in California. It's in the foothills east of San Jose, right near the evacuation zone from the wildfires. So like stone's throw, I open the window, I can see into Silicon Valley, but like literally there's cows and chickens behind us.
It's amazing. That's amazing. But it was harrowing. I was following you on Instagram and watching the wildfire season and being like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's like I've been, so a little bit about me, like I've been interested in sustainability basically since I was a teenager. I first started, my first major in college was environmental studies. So like climate change and sustainability have been like deeply embedded in kind of the things that I look at. But it is definitely a privilege to live in a place where you rarely suffer the consequences of climate change. And so I think this season was like a very visceral, like the chickens have come home to roost. The lifestyle that I currently lead, despite my interest in alignment, like is contributing to substantially to the climate change issue. And, in a way, it was kind of nice to be like, yes, this is the consequence. Now I see this and this is a little bit more real. But yeah, it was also terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, like, what's one more wake-up call during the pandemic? Like, what's one more...
Exactly. It was like, when I was, like, recapping the year, I had forgotten about the evacuation until, like, somebody mentioned it. And I was like, oh, yeah, that was this year.
Yeah, what a great year. 2020 was a real win. Stone cutting is actually, like, an after-work hobby. And is it...
Or before work hobby.
Or,
sometimes during work hobby.
Sometimes during work hobby. So, during the day, you're a scientist. Mm-hmm. So this might explain how well you know the symmetries of the...
I'm a nerd.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to say it that way, but I mean, anyone who confesses to liking rocks and minerals, I think is in the same category. So, we can have a special nerd salute. We don't have to talk about what you do during the day exactly, except to say that you have a big brain and you love looking at things from... But this is a cool thing to me that I'm always curious about the marriage between beauty, which is a very subjective kind of interpretation and experience, and science, because I think science has, I'm not a scientist and I studied art history, so I have half of what you have. I appreciate things that are beautiful, but I don't know why. And I think, how has gem cutting and science been married for you? Like
So
appreciation of the sparkles
yeah,
and
let's see. Well, I mean, I first got into gems and minerals because I had like the eyewitness series of like gems and minerals as a little kid,
me
and so
too.
like it is literally the combination of here's some science facts about a thing, and ooh, here look how pretty it is. So I think for me, it's been like fundamentally intertwined from the beginning. And as it relates to like the process of gem cutting, mm, so I think science is informative at various like points in the process. So everything from like selecting rough. So typically knowing what you have, if you're just trying to buy finished stones as like a relatively like naive or I would say like uneducated consumer is quite difficult because everything that is like all the natural features are usually obliterated during the
Yes.
process of cutting.
Yes.
However, like if you have an understanding of like the crystal habits that minerals tend to form in, the optical properties, like whether it's pleochroic, what the luster should be like, if there's like characteristic surface textures associated with the mineral, that can help identify a piece of rough. So like there's like a kind of treasure hunt aspect of it. When I first started, I really liked going to gem shows back when like we could still congregate in large quantities in real
Yes.
in real life, and like hunt through all of the mineral specimens and do like a treasure hunt for like what small piece of high quality specimen could I like you know uh, find out of kilos and kilos of just like regular like specimen grade and material, or like sometimes there would be things mixed in. So like maybe I think one time there was a large tray of aquamarine and I found a tiny like fingernail sized sapphire, but it's like, oh, this doesn't look quite like, this feels a little heavier, like the surface texture is a little different, like it doesn't fracture, like the fracture sheen doesn't look the same way. And I actually did take it to a gemologist later on and she identified it as sapphire, so that was really cool.
Yeah.
So I think on like the what do I have in the first place, science is really informative there, and that science is called gemology. And kind of low key on my bucket list is to get certified or accredited as a gemologist someday. Although it's a pretty substantial time and money investment. And then the process of cutting itself is, I would actually say, like really a craft. You don't necessarily need to know a lot about science to make it work. I use a program that someone else wrote to help design my gem cuts and to predict how it will perform. And that's just a matter of like changing some numbers, knowing what envelopes of angles tend to be good for a particular material, and then really my endpoint for is this design finished is subjective. Like, do I think it does? Do I think it look?
Is it nice or?
Is it nice? Yeah. Is it sparkly?
Yeah.
Does it have a window?
Would I wear
Do
it?
I like how it looks? So that's definitely subjective, and I think a lot more on the art side. The process of cutting itself is tips and tricks that people have learned throughout the years, as like there's some deeply technical people in the hobby and craft who like there's one guy who I love. His name is Gearloose. He's like in his 80s and like a retired machinist slash manufacturer.
Perfect.
And he's like basically been so successful at his side hobby of making laps and polishing compounds that he's like pulled himself out of retirement and has been like busier than ever.
That's amazing.
But basically he like is super helpful at dropping knowledge in random Facebook groups, and will like explain like how he makes his alloys, or what about this makes it like actually good at polishing, and like, oh, by the way, here's a scanning electron microscope of the surface of the lap and so you can see how the diamonds embed. So it's like true geekery. I as an end user just like trust what he says when he says, use this polish on this lap and here's how to apply it, and I go, yes sir. And then when it mostly works, I'm like, oh great. And then when I contaminate it through my own idiocy, it's like pulling out my hair and then just like, okay, how do I fix this? People on the internet, how have you fixed it? I'm gonna have to fight a few stoves until I just like brute force fix it. And then sometimes I give up and give it to my boyfriend to resurface because he's also a machinist.
Oh, is he?
So,
oh.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I feel like that's how like science and engineering kind of intersect with the process of gem cutting for me.
Wow. What do they say? The people who cut together something together. There's probably some sort of nerdy gem cutter family adage that I don't know about.
I feel like as we suffer together, we appreciate the fruits of each other's labor all that much more.
Okay, perfect. So what kind of stones do you prefer to cut? So we don't have to get too technical because they're probably you and I are the only people who, well, you never know, but who are going to appreciate this part the most. But so like, we've got our diamonds, sapphires, rubies, emeralds, and then we get into sort of garnets. And what's your favorite material to work with?
Garnets,
Garnets.
absolutely garnets, for a number of reasons. So kind of the mineral species that got me into gem collecting in the first place was garnets. I think I was a second grader, and I was sitting bored at recess, or recess or an assembly where they had us sitting on the gravel outside, and I was looking at the ground because you're a kid, you're close to the ground anyways. What do you do? You look at the dirt, and this gravel happened to be granite, and sometimes garnet forms in granite, and this particular granite happened to shed minuscule garnets. I'm talking like literally, if you take a needle and you poke it into a piece of paper, the garnets are the size of a little poke. So super, super, super teeny, but they were bright red. And I was like, ooh, red. So I would like spend recesses with like teeny tweezers plucking out garnets from the gravel.
Not a lot of friends.
Obsessive little kids.
Yeah,
I'm an obsessive adult, so it kind of works out. So I think I always had this like emotional attachment to garnets. And then from a aesthetic standpoint, they're really pretty. They have a fairly high refractive index, so they have quite a bit of sparkle. They occur in like all the colors of the rainbow, not just red. And they're pretty easy to cut and polish. Like they're very beginner friendly. And so like I feel like it was natural of me to gravitate towards garnets. And while I like other things now too, I have like other gems that are up and coming. I think garnets will always be like my one true love.
It'll be your like sweet spot. And so diamonds are the hardest to cut, right? Because they're the hardest mineral.
Yeah. And I actually can't cut diamonds on my setup. I mean, I think technically it's feasible. It would just take like weeks. So diamond cutting machines are different from mine in that they're much beefier. They're made out of like cast iron. The armatures are like humongous, and they actually use a mechanical attachment to the diamond, because when you grind a diamond, it gets so hot that it will melt any like most adhesives. So I have a dop wax. I use wax to attach my stones to the sticks. And they would melt. Some people use epoxy or glue, and I think it gets it so hot that it would actually like shatter the adhesive. So they have like these mechanical to like clamp down on the diamond.
Oh, yowzers! Yeah, I mean, the diamond cutting videos I've seen, they look very unfriendly.
Yeah,
it looks very unfriendly. And you created a custom design for Dr. Fauci.
Well, I haven't been able to get it to anybody who I like fangirl on a science basis. I think Dr. Fauci has probably gotten too many death threats, so I don't think they're sending fan mail through. I'm sure he has I'm sure on like the medical side, he gets fan mail from doctors, but they probably go through other back channels. So I think, so I have this like COVID design that I started designing, I think last March, right before COVID like caused a shelter-in-place order. Yes. I remember, I think the last time I went to a restaurant before shelter-in-place was at a pho restaurant, and I had my laptop with me, and I was sitting there like eating my noodles while like optimizing this design. And then sure enough, like a few days later, it's shelter-in-place, can't go anywhere. And I cut it shortly thereafter. And I've done it a few times since for, I think, a couple of ICU nurses, somebody who worked in like logistics and supply for a hospital system.
Wow.
And I think a pharmacist who's also been slammed from COVID. And then I think one person ordered it as a gift to their mom who recovered. So I feel like it's been nice to be able to offer that as a request for those who find it very meaningful.
And it looks sort of like I'm using my fingers to describe it. I don't know why, but it looks kind of like
I got you.
Oh, you got? Oh, okay.
So I cut one for myself too, because I'm not.
Oh, you did? Okay, good.
I got to have at least one.
Well, I agree.
But this is the big boy. It's an amethyst, and let's see if this video will take it. I don't know if we can.
Not, oh, kind of. Oh,
Yeah.
kind of, sort of. Oh, that
Let's
is a
see.
big boy. Oh, yeah. So if you're listening, I'll describe it to you. It's really cool. Go to Michelle's Instagram page and look at it yourself.
The backlighting. Ooh, it's
Oh,
cool
that's
in
so
backlit.
cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it looks kind of like a sphere that has all these little uh, darts,
Yeah, so
arrows.
it was my other like bio nerding. So a quick lesson in virology
Ooh.
with Michelle. So a coronavirus is a type of virus. It's called an envelope virus. So some viruses have just a protein capsule that holds their nucleic acids. Coronaviruses have an extra lipid membrane that surrounds it, and then projecting through the membrane that's actually partially embedded are what are called spike proteins. And those spike proteins, if I recall correctly,
I won't be able to
help
correct you, so sounds
help
good.
the virus attach to like the target cells and then enter the host cells and
Yes.
inject their and help the membranes fuse, releasing the nucleic acid inside. So this design has like around the table the lipid bilayer, and then you've got the spikes radiating out, and then like smaller proteins or other membrane proteins as well. So smaller proteins inside the spikes as stylized other proteins.
So cool. Now,
And then on the back, there is a stylized receptor. So it looks kind of like this, usually in science diagrams. So like you've got your spike that's like this, and then you've got your receptor. And then in like biodiagrams, you just look at like, oh, look here. Anyways.
I love that. Is HIV an envelope virus as well?
I actually don't know. I don't think it is.
Because I thought that coronavirus and HIV, so I work in HIV, which is why I thought I could connect you to Anthony Fauci, but that's when I found out that he was receiving too many death threats. So that was a dead end for
Yeah.
me. But I thought that there were a lot of similarities between corona and HIV, but I have to admit, I appreciate my breaks from it. So I don't spend time researching, like, I'd much rather talk about gemstones than HIV and the coronavirus in general. So, but what a cool fusion that was.
Well, actually, so it does have a lipid membrane. So
Ooh,
you're right.
Yay!
Good recall.
Thank you so much. And so, what are people's reactions? What have they been to your gem cutting? I mean, so you sell on Instagram. Do you work with jewelers? What is the industry like?
So I actually have come to realize how tiny of a niche I'm in when it comes to the gem and jewelry industry as a whole. So the particular niche that I found in is mostly like direct to consumer, from people who like stumble across my Instagram. I'm also on Reddit, and I think we've built a nice little community there with two other gem cutters. Um, and it's mostly like people who, mostly millennials who like, are interested in either engagement rings, gifts for themselves, gifts for other people, and care a lot about how things are made, that they understand a little bit about the story behind it. I do work with a couple of also like small designer jewelers, although I think because I am just a chick living in California who recently like entered this industry, I don't have a lot of buying power. So the rough that I buy is pretty expensive. Right. Since I buy small quantities that I cut myself, I don't have like a commercial factory or anything.
Right.
I'm only starting to build up the vendor network where I'm starting to like reach out to overseas brokers or vendors and like work with them directly. So a lot of the time, like when I buy rough, it's passed through a couple of hands.
Yes.
Before it gets to me. So like on the supply side, like my costs are high. Labor costs that I try to pay myself are like also pretty high. I think it works out to be $20 an hour, but when you're competing against commercial factories that can pay laborers in developing countries pennies or dollars per stone, right. It's very expensive compared to what most jewelers are used to paying. And another thing too is like jewelers, especially artisanal jewelers, like they have it rough too. Like their labor costs are high, their material costs are also high. Yeah. So for those reasons, like unless they're a designer jeweler who's specialized in working with precision stones and often have like a large enough following to justify it, I don't work with as many jewelers as I would like. I've thought about doing like wholesale pricing only, but I think right now I don't have really the margin to support that.
Mm.
So sometimes I'll do like a as needed basis. Like there's a couple of like up and coming jewelers who I think are just starting to get a toehold, and sometimes we'll do a trade where like I'll trade them a stone for actually, like, since I wear jewelry and collect jewelry, like maybe I'll want something from them and I'll like offer them a stone. This is my retail value. Can I trade for an approximately equal amount of your worth? Let's
Yes.
pretend that made sense. um, but yeah, I think um, other times I have a couple of jewelers who I like to recommend clients to. So
Mm.
in that sense, I do work with them, but they're not responsible for buying a gem of mine outright and then having to hold that in their inventory with
Yes.
all of the associated opportunity costs.
Yes.
So that's yeah. I think I'm excited to see more of that coming through. There's a couple that I think I recently had like 5 or 6 clients go through one particular jeweler on Instagram who I've been fangirling for a while. So
Oh.
I'm very excited about seeing where that leads.
Well, I already mentioned this, but I'm kind of a fan of yours as well. I just think it's so cool that you're doing this, and I also think, you're describing kind of like a little person in a big industry, but I also think, you know, it must be. Do you interact at all with kind of the big conglomerates who I feel are heavy-handed and nasty and
Yeah. So directly, not very much. I think the biggest opportunity for me to have done that would be at trade shows, and I did go to Tucson in 2020, but I think that was my first time actually being able to make it into the trade shows. But I didn't budget very much time, and I spent like all of my time at the trade show at like a friend's booth, kind of being scared, and just like walking around, going like, "Oh my god, this is so much money in this room. Oh my god."
so overwhelming?
Um, the other place I've interacted with that is I was recently invited to some, they call it living room sessions from it's a collective, I would almost say, like a group of jewelers primarily in the Bay Area who are interested in making jewelry more ethically, whatever that
Hmm.
means. And there's a lot of conversations about what does ethics in jewelry pertain to, both
Hmm.
on like the supply side, the workers' rights side, and the like the jewelers themselves. They're almost all women. There's like one guy who's doing the organization, who's really like who connected me to this other group. We talk about like supporting progressive causes. They talk about like their experiences being discriminated against as women bunch jewelers in a very male dominated industry.
Hmm.
And then through them, I'm starting to get a perspective of like the major jewelry supply houses, the major buyers, the major like suppliers of commercial stones, and like the scale of their power. I remember, for example, like um, a few of my vendors started offering Madagascar sapphire rough a little while ago, and
Hmm.
it's mostly what they call fancy sapphire colors, so like not the royal blue that is most desirable. These are like all of the off colors, so like light pinks, light purples, like pale grays and whites and yellows. Um, and and I'm paying like $50 a carat for the rough stone, so like $150 to $200 per rough piece, and I lose 75 to 80% of that stone during the cutting process. So it ends up being like quite an expensive purchase for me.
Hmm.
And so I talked to this person about it, and he was like, in Madagascar, those are like the trash stones. They don't want like they would be dollars
Yeah.
in Madagascar. So that's the kind of markup that I get from like buying in the States. And then on top of that, he was like, are you aware of like the situation in Madagascar when it comes to the mining there? It's tremendously damaging to the environment. But on the flip
And
side,
to the humans that mine them.
and to the humans, but on the flip side, that's how a lot of people make their living. Like literally, if there were to be not to be a mining industry, like people would starve.
Yeah.
So there's a really delicate balance between, and like it's not really clear what the best case scenario is between like supporting miners, supporting a mining industry that treats those miners better, and that treats the environment better, and like what do you do in that situation? What's the least harm case? It's not very clear, and there's not very much information that is available about it, even for people who are in this industry.
Right.
So it's, yeah, that's been my closest brush to the big picture jewelry industry.
Yeah, and there's a big push for laboratory grown things too, and
Yeah.
the idea that they're sustainable because they can be made, with
That
technology.
came up in the conversation too, and specifically about lab grown diamonds. Though other synthetic gems enters the conversation there, it gets messy. So like,
Yeah.
um, absolutely, there's likely to be less like resource degradation in these like high biodiversity rich
Regions.
countries.
Yes.
There's absolutely a cost associated with that. Like, yes, like you are building factories, you are often using large amounts of water. How water and energy and how that water and energy is being generated is unclear, and it's highly site specific. Um, so I introduced, like, since I come from a sustainability background, one concept is of a life cycle analysis. Like, it's not just about the energy use. It's not just about the land use. At least speaking from a resource side, so like not talking about the social side of like supporting miners yet. It's highly context specific. So like diamond mining in Namibia, in like the offshore underwater sands, is going to be very different from mining in Australia or
Yes.
mining in Canada. So like they all have different impacts associated with them.
Yes.
Similarly, a synthetic gem producing facility located in China, and like where in China, because China is huge
Yes.
compared to one in Russia or Thailand or the United States. Like those are also going to have very different costs associated.
Yeah.
And right now, it's hard to get accurate information from about what the actual impacts are because there's so much industry and like there's so like what do you call it there are market forces at work or no sorry what's the term for like uh, conflicts of interest. So like
Oh,
you've got these
yes.
publications coming out,
Yes.
and who's funding them? So like I
Yes.
think a couple of years ago, there like so like diamond industry, the natural diamond industry has been like terrified of like lab diamonds for a while because they can be made so much cheaper and like there's such a glut of natural diamond that they think like, oh my god, it's going to wipe out all of our potential profits, right?
Yes.
So a couple of years ago there was a piece that came out that was about the energy impacts of making synthetic diamonds and oh how it's so much more energy use than like for a natural diamond. And then if you look at who funded that study, it's
Yes.
the diamond industry, the
Of
natural
course.
diamond industry. And there was like, yeah, there's been counters by a scientist, like an actual scientist who runs an actual lab who is funded by Lab Diamonds, who did an LCA, and that he was the one who was like, no, it's really dependent, and like this is taken out of context and looking at
Yes.
one particular measure of energy
Yes.
use and comparing it to one particular mine, not even
Yes.
other mines. So I guess like a lot of the real world answer is it's complicated.
Yes.
Um,
Gosh. The
and I
grays.
think there was a great summation that I heard from somebody who was basically, it depends on what you care the most about. If you care the most about resource use, go with synthetic diamond. If you care the most about like supporting like native or like country of origin miners, go to like a small independent mining collective of natural diamonds. If you like care about like the economy and the global economy, and like those large interests of corporations who already control much of the economy, then like go with the standard like
Yeah.
natural diamond.
Yeah. I mean, there is definitely choice fatigue when you get that close. And I remember, I don't know, I must be hungry, but I remember I saw some documentary about how salsa came, like the rise of
Oh.
jarred prepared salsa, and how there was like a certain number of choices that was
Mm-hmm.
like the sweet spot, and then there were too many or too little, and that, yeah. Anyway, chunky, extra chunky,
Mm-hmm.
or regular. There was like the three that were the wins, and when we look and increasingly, I think in all of our consumer choices, we now have the opportunity to have an origin story and to connect with the maker. And sometimes it's nice to just like buy toilet paper and not think about it. um,
Absolutely.
but I think something that's so precious and so personal, like a luxury item that we literally decorate ourselves with,
Mm-hmm.
it's wonderful to know, I think, where, as much as we can about what it is and why it's special. And I mean, certainly like your designs are unique, And so it's amazing to see what you post because you choose beautiful stuff and then you make it even, you have a great eye for the rough that you choose and the colors that you choose. And then you cut them in these cool ways. And it's so fascinating, and such a cool expression of your art. I just wanted to touch really briefly on our friend COVID because I do think that, I mean, certainly I was on my phone more, and that's probably why I discovered you.
Yeah.
So we can thank COVID for making this episode happen.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a huge change in how you advertised after the murder of George Floyd. And I'm not going to say you became an activist overnight, but certainly it sounds like you've been an activist for a long time. But certainly your professional page became way more political. And how did that change your business? How has that merging been?
I'm going to talk around that at first because I think I'm also kind of scattered right now. So one thing about me is like in all of my professional lives, I think my personal and professional boundaries have always been a little blurred. I don't know if it's just like the life of a scientist, but like you're usually working nights, you take your work home, you work weekends, like, you know, what is me time? I don't know. So when I added gems to that, I think I also like bleed into my gem business. I don't really like, I think, I don't know. I would prefer supporting vendors and sharing my art with clients who I think align with my visions of an ideal world made prettier with gems. So for me, it wasn't a super hard decision to make where like, I feel like I can't just post these luxury items without context and acknowledgement to like the more important things going on. And there was this, viral push of artists and makers speaking out against this. And, as with most shows of support on social media, it was relatively short-lived. Like
not with
kind
you
of shallow,
though.
but like
not with you.
At the same time, like I didn't feel like I could continue on as business normal.
Yes.
And so I think for me, like while I was, deeply anxious about the blowback, it wasn't a hard decision to make in the first place. And also, like as a POC queer person, like I feel like this conversation like is important to me and like the safety of myself and my family and the people I care about. So it's not, like maybe I just am closer to it and feel like it's, I can't escape it in my daily life. Like,
yes.
Why should the rest of you? I don't know.
Yeah. Fair question.
And I also like informing people. And so like, as I come across things that I think like, strike me deeply, like I have a desire to share that with the world. And I try to curate it so it like, and I think sometimes it would get kind of overwhelming where I have like, a news story and 20 Instagram stories, but I try to keep it fairly digestible and like add links to resources to people who do spend much more of their time and effort understanding these very complicated issues where I'm a messenger in this case. Like I would not consider myself an activist or an authority, but I do think that I have a platform and I should use it to share the message.
I think it's so amazing. And, you're right that there may have been a push for makers and for everyone really to raise their voices, but very few did in the way that you did and continue to do it, consistently. And I have learned so much from your posts. And I mean, especially because you're in America, I've learned a lot more about America because
for better or for worse,
we have our own problems in Canada. But I found you really illuminating, and so sparkly can be applied as well to the way that you've illuminated and brightened some of my thought patterns. So I appreciate that very, very much. And I guess was there any backlash? I mean, was there?
There were definitely a few people who, like, I lost followers, I lost clients, I, got some occasional hate mail. It's directly proportional with like how aggressive I am about it. So like when it was just like COVID information or like, here's some racism information, like I didn't get a whole lot of pushback there. But when I went, cops, I lost a client who was a cop. I'm like I'm sure you're doing your best and you're doing what you think you're doing, but like I think this relationship just ain't gonna work out. We're just not compatible.
Yeah, I have yeah, it's tough. I have some very well-intentioned friends who either are defending what I'm attacking, or or they're in a relationship with a police officer, and it's complicated, right? Because I feel very strongly that the system needs to change, and they are complicit in that system, right? And it's it's awkward to have over Thanksgiving dinner, but especially if you're talking about a garnet. It just seems like, it seems like there isn't. It's one thing if you're sitting at the same table because you're family, and it's another
Yeah,
if it's an optional kind of relationship, I suppose.
exactly. And there's plenty of gem cutters who will support their views.
Oh my
So,
God, yes, yes.
so that another, okay, I would say on like a business, like income or client relate, like the number of clients I have has not decreased. I had a pretty good year last year, probably because I spent like I couldn't go out, and so like instead of going out dancing or like hanging out with friends or like eating out, I would just stay home and cut. So I cut like, and I think I cut over 500 stones last year.
Wow.
Which is insane, like almost 2 stones a day, on top of a job where, yes, I was working from home a lot more, but it was a little bit.
That's a lot.
A lot. It was a lot. So I think that compensated for any like loss of clients or loss of sales I would have otherwise had. The big part has been like a fracturing of the gem cutting industry. So a lot of my major vendors, like a lot of the US vendors that I used to buy from, I don't anymore. One of them has turned out to be like an incredibly like diehard QAnon nut job. And like, he was like the nicest guy.
Yes.
And like everyone, like he had a reputation for being like really one of the nicest miners. He's a sapphire miner. One of the nicest miner. Guy would give you the shirt off his back. Like he didn't really care who you were from. Like he would just treat you with the hospitality of a guest. But his online persona was diametrically opposite. And I think a lot of people tried for a long time to like pull him away from that. And I think I tried for 5 or 6 months. And then I think after Trump lost and he like doubled down, I was just like there is no going back from this.
He was QAnon with the wind.
Yeah. And then I had another vendor who he's a California Republican. And I think for a long time I said he was like the only like staunch Republican who I could respect and have a reasonable conversation with. And he like held that for a very long time up until the insurrection, at which point he was like, no, like, people should be should have the right to protest for the things that they find meaningful. Like, didn't you support George Floyd protests? Like, aren't they like they're the same thing? And I'm like,
oh dear,
not the same thing.
Not the same thing.
So yeah, he was probably the only local vendor to me, and somebody who I think I probably spent more than like anybody else. And so he's somebody who I unfortunately will not be supporting anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that's been the biggest thing. So like, it's encouraged me to reach out to more people, especially, people overseas, and confront some of my own biases when it comes to how I treat vendors or what kind of vendors I like to work with. I was recently very gently called out, but it was a call out that like I discriminate based on their ability to speak English. And not so much grammatical errors or whatnot, but like the ability to articulate complex thoughts in English and to understand nuance, which I think is kind of like in my America bubble is generally a good sign.
Right.
But she was like, hey, you might be missing on a lot of people who are honest, trustworthy sellers, but because they don't have a good of a grasp of the language enough to communicate complex ideas, like you may be losing out on some like otherwise excellent connections. And I was like,
and that may be true,
point.
but you also are sending dollars for a product that you've never seen before. I mean, it's always a risk, no matter.
Yeah. And there's time, like for me, like time is always in short supply. So if there's somebody I can talk to easily and like trust that my message will be received in the spirit of its intent. But it was a good check that like I could be better there.
Well, I have a lot of gem sellers following me now because of all of the cutters that I follow. So I can pass them on to you. One, I think he's like a part-time model and a gem supplier in Afghanistan. I don't know, a lot of wistful photos. Like I think there's one of him standing by like a reflection pool, just like looking over, and then next to it like a handful of rough aquamarines. I'm like, oh,
Oh, cute.
it's great. um, I guess I just wanted to, take this opportunity and to chat with you because I feel like you're such a cool person. I didn't know you were queer, by the way. That was a surprise to me. I mean,
Oh,
welcome.
it's pretty low key. Like I'm in my boyfriend. We're in a het passing relationship. He's pan. He's non-binary. Oh, they are non-binary. I split them all the time. I'm bi. Rarely act on it. Rarely have had the chance. But I think one of the things that I've explored a lot this year is bi erasure, and like I should just own it and like not be afraid to say it. There's several people very close to me who are trans. Lots and lots of people who are like embedded in the queer community. So I think for a while I just felt like, oh, I was not queer enough to really claim that label. But fuck that.
You are. Yeah, you are. Fuck that. That's great. Well, I mean, it just makes me like you more because I'm like, oh, one of the family. But also, I think it's really kick-ass and really brave and obviously there's a whole scale of bravery, but I think when a hobby that is encouraged by financial, I mean, really, how else do you know if you're doing a good job than having this monetization, right? If somebody wants to buy something that you made, that's a ding saying you're going in the right direction. And for somebody to meld their political views, which I personally am fully aligned with, and take a risk of losing that monetization and that financial support and just blaze on, like that's radical. That's awesome. And for you to also be breaking into an industry or working within an industry that doesn't have a lot of room for queer people or for women or for people of color, and is largely, I just imagine like a monster truck rally where they're all like snarling and rolling over each other. That's also brave and cool.
Well, I'm going to comment two things. One is I do have a day job that takes care of my needs, and I feel like that does release a lot of the pressure of being able to make a stand. Because if I do lose all of the income from gem cutting, I'm still okay.
Right.
And I understand that that's a risk that people who support themselves doing this for a living may not be able to literally afford to take. And so I'm privileged to have that safety that safety net. Another thing too is I do want to give a shout out to kind of pioneers in the gem field for women. So like Lisa Elser and Meg Berry, I think are two of, I want to say like the earlier wave of feminists, active feminists in the gem industry, and they caught so much flack for doing so. Like they both have reputations for good and for bad. They both have made a lot of enemies and a lot of staunch supporters. And Lisa's in particular has been like a really important mentor for me over the last year. And I feel like maybe because a lot more young people are also getting into faceting with the availability on the internet of resources and the greater availability of like faceting machines that are at price point where like a hobbyist could consider doing it. I feel like of the people I tend to interact with, my politics and my person have been less of an issue than it sounds like it's been for women gem cutters in the past. I also I would say like I don't necessarily come off as super feminine, and that can be for good. So like I can speak technical jargonese with the best of them, and like I can present myself as a very direct, very brusque person if need be, except when it comes to haggling. I'm awful at haggling, but basically like I can carve out respect for myself, and I feel like there's definitely other women gem cutters who are in my generation who may not have that. Like they may be socialized to present more feminine, and I think they may also have more difficulty. It's a pro and con, right? No matter which way, patriarchy and misogyny has this like fucked in some way or the other.
Yes.
So like there's silver linings on both sides. I get less sweetheart treatment, but I'm subjected to less sweetheart treatment.
Right. I mean, I sounds like that the first point where you're thinking like we stand on the backs of of our ancestors. Stand on the shoulders of our
aunties.
Yeah.
Our aunties have taken us to where we are.
Our aunties, that's wonderful. But I think saying that you have an inherent ability to sort of navigate it is is a deflection of a compliment. So you should just absorb it, just take it in. It is
Okay.
yours. No, 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 no. Um, I don't have any more questions because I think we got it talking, and my goal for Nocturnal Transmission is to bring
I
some.
didn't realize that was the name.
Hello, that's the name. Is to expose, to bring light, to erupt some different voices, and also I think I definitely have diverse interests, but I in talking with you, learning more about you, I fully want to support your gem cutting and any way I can. So what is your Instagram handle? MVM Gems?
MVM Gems. Yep. It's my initials, gems in the end.
Perfect. So that'll be easy, and I'll make sure to put it in the description. And I thank you so much for taking the time.
And thank you for inviting me on this and for reaching out.
Oh,
I think this is the first time I've been interviewed about my gem cutting, so you've gotten that honor.
Yay! And you're the closing episode of my first season. So this is a beautiful wrap up, I think, to just as far as I'm concerned, a more hopeful take on what has been quite a cycle. This past year has been quite a time for all of us, and it's connecting with little stars around the world that reminds us that A, we're not alone, and B, there's some cool things happening even when we're sitting at home looking at our phone feeling lost. There are other people doing awesome things all the time. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. What an exciting ride this project has been. I've learned a lot about how to communicate and listen and what's the opposite of speaking again? And I've really appreciated your patience, your feedback, and your loyalty in listening to me learn. I'm really excited about what I've accomplished in the last year, and I'm looking forward to bringing more voices to light and seeing what season 2 of Nocturnal Transmission will have for us all. So with that, signing off. Take care of yourselves. Bye.